Hi there and welcome to the Microsoft Graph Ask the Experts. I'm Jeremy Thake. I'm a Principal PM in the Microsoft Graph group, and I'm with me today is a bunch of really amazing experts across the whole of engineering and DevRel and marketing and all of the product groups. So we're hoping that we'll be able to field all those questions you have for us. In the chat, you'll see that you can actually ask questions. And so if you can jump in and ask those questions now, and we'll start to queue up those things as they come through, you can either post anonymously or you can use your username. And if you see one that you like, you can also upvote it in Teams, and that will help me in my prioritization of what we get through in the next half hour of all the questions that we have. We will bring those experts on screen to answer in person on the video for those that maybe want to watch this on demand afterwards. And for those questions that we don't get to, we'll actually pop those onto our Microsoft Q&A site. So the aka.ms/askgraph is where you can ask Microsoft Graph questions anytime during the year. We have a dedicated team that go on there and help answer those questions as we go through. So with that said, I will just quickly look into the Q&A section here, and if we don't see any questions, I had one I wanted to bring up for Yina, who is the partner group manager for Microsoft Graph and one of the original, I guess, founders and sometimes known as the mother of the Graph, which she can and does like. When was the Graph first released, Yina?
Hey, Jeremy. Hey, everyone on the call. It's so great to see you all here at Build. Thank you for joining us today. Microsoft Graph has been released for several years now. We actually launched the preview at Build 2015, so it's been 7 years since the first time that Graph made its debut on the Build conference, actually. So it's been a good time, and it's now empowering hundreds of thousands of developers across Microsoft 365 organizations. And I know I don't know if folks noticed in the blog that there's two key metrics that we share this around, which is more than 53% of organizations have apps that are third-party apps that are powered with Microsoft Graph. And now we have over 1 million monthly active applications on the Graph. It's pretty exciting. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah, it's exciting for us to see that and for us to celebrate that internally in our team meetings as we see those numbers grow and all the work that we put in, and developers like yourselves all watching that have built stuff using the Microsoft Graph, whether it be a Teams app, a SharePoint app, an Office add-ins app. All those things help us to grow how we connect to Microsoft 365 data through the Graph. So I shared a slide here that actually shows the different topics that we can cover today. I am prodding the bear here to see whether we can get some more questions pushing through. And so I can see one here that it's from Chris. It says, how can I fetch the live participants of a Teams meeting just by using the Graph API with PowerShell? So I'm going to bring Nick Kramer onto screen here because Nick is from the Teams API and hopefully can help to answer that one.
Yeah, unfortunately, you stumped me on that one. I don't know the answer to that one off the top of my head.
I know, obviously, we unpack the question, PowerShell, we have Microsoft Graph SDKs with PowerShell that sit on top of the Microsoft Graph APIs. And so anything you can do with the Graph API, you can either do with REST directly or with .NET or JavaScript and all the other languages, and additionally PowerShell. But in terms of fetching the live participants from a Teams meeting, that's part of our cloud communications section inside of our docs. We have the ability post-meeting to look at the attendees, but I don't think there is a real-time way of pulling those live participants out.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. For a normal meeting, there is, but for a live meeting, which is kind of its own special beast, I'm not sure what we have there.
Yeah, and so what I'll ask you to do, Chris, is if you ask that question on aka.ms/askgraph, I will pull in the correct PMs on the cloud communication sides. That was a shame that we couldn't get the first question done, but that is how it's going to work. And we could have had 50 experts on here for the Graph for the amount of scope we have. Let's just see what other questions we've got coming through here. Okay. Okay, so Anonymous has, I'd like to learn how to use Microsoft Graph to build apps that obtain information in SharePoint lists and libraries. So Jeremy Kelly, how would you talk about this from a SharePoint perspective with Microsoft Graph?
I was just reading that question and I knew you were going to poke on it. The best place to get started would just be to look at our Sites API. So the way we've organized things for SharePoint in Microsoft Graph, we have two primary mechanisms. We have the OneDrive for Business, which is kind of under the Me Drive space, and then we have SharePoint Sites, which are conveniently under the Sites API. So anything that deals with a list is going to go under Sites. So you'd find the ID of the site you want, which you can reference by path, and we have that documented in the Graph docs. And then once you have the path to the site, you can get the list. You can enumerate the lists that are there. You can work with the individual items. We have, we've been looking at grading ourselves on our coverage for lists in Microsoft Graph. I'd say we're at about a C right now with lists. Most of the basic operations you can do pretty straightforward. There are a few more advanced column types that are not yet published to Graph that we'll be looking to push. Hopefully over the next few months, that stuff will start to appear in Graph. And there's a few other more complex operations, like getting the delta of list items is currently available in beta. And as we look to stabilize that, we just published the docs for that recently. So you'll see list item delta available in that content. So like I said, I would start with the sites docs and certainly look through any of the samples. Most of the samples out there, I think, deal with files, but lists are pretty similar. List items and drive items are pretty close.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think the docs definitely has a lot of coverage there. And I think there's a little bit of SharePoint knowledge to know the hierarchy of sites, lists, list items, or sites, document libraries, and files. But yeah, it's all there, and there's some great samples in there. Okay, the next question. Is there a way to target permissions for daemon applications that only have access to certain objects? For example, a daemon application to add users to only certain groups. Now I have Kalen on the call. I can see him nodding, so he's definitely ingesting this question and trying to work out the answer. So Kalen, do you want to jump on screen and have a crack at helping here?
Definitely. Thank you, Jeremy. So the answers are that it depends on the object. So for example, if you're talking about mailboxes, the Exchange APIs do have that facility or feature where you can give a permission like mail.read all, but you can limit it to a certain set of mailboxes. I'm not aware of any other object, like any other object or entity in Microsoft Graph, like security groups, having the same facility today. But I'll definitely take that as a feedback and see if it's something we can put it on our roadmap for futures, which is essentially to give an application access to a set of security groups instead of every security group in the tenant. Jeremy?
Awesome, thank you.
Just throw in that resource-specific consent for Teams objects is a form of that, being able to give an app access to just one team and not all your teams.
Yeah, that is a really good point, is that there are different ways of constraining those objects. Resource-specific consent is one. App access policies with the Exchange APIs is another way of doing that, to restrict mailboxes in Exchange too. Okay, the next question. Is there a way to get search results from Teams chats with the Graph API? And I'm actually going to punt that one to Brian, who's been doing a lot of work around search incubations.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Great question. For the Microsoft Search APIs on Microsoft Graph, we've got a lot of different data sources that are available, from Exchange to working with identity groups, users, and so forth, files and such. But unfortunately, today we do not yet have a generally available or even a beta option for searching through Teams chats. There are APIs, as Nick can probably attest to. We do have APIs for getting those chats individually or listing them, whether it's via a channel for a user and so forth. But we don't actually have a search API that's available for those, and is not currently on our public roadmap. But we do appreciate that feedback, and we would love for you, if you would actually like to share that on our new feedback portal. We've got a way for you to actually register this, upvote other questions that are out there. So we'd love to see that out there and hear from you. What are those use cases, and how can we best serve you for that?
Thanks, Brian. Okay, and the next question is a good bit of feedback here, but I'd like Nick to address this from a docs perspective. It's like the Data Connect first build training, get started, quick start, is not that intuitive. And this is a recurring problem where the docs do not reflect the experience. What is being done to help bridge that gap between the actual implementation of the product and the docs that we generate. Nick, do you want to share a bit of the story about how we're doing that? And if others want to chime in, they can. And then we've got a bunch of people in developer relations on here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is great feedback, and I'll take that back with the team, right? So one thing, first off, is recently we added support for Azure Synapse Analytics for Microsoft Graph Data Connect. So that tutorial will be updated to actually reflect the way to do the same tutorial, but using Azure Synapse Analytics instead. The thing is, so Microsoft Graph Data Connect, you need to understand, is an activity inside of Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse pipelines. Right. So as the Azure product evolves, we are updating the documentation and releasing those tutorials. I'll be interested in following up offline on that one. You can find me on Twitter, Nick Shalabot. Just follow up. I'd like to learn more about what exactly seems to be the problem, because these tutorials have been updated fairly recently. But it is something that we are trying to improve. And one thing we're working on right now is releasing additional accelerators as well. So not only allowing you to, or giving you steps to go and run your Microsoft Graph Data Connect pipeline, but also how to go and build different solutions based on the data sets that are available. So those are some of the improvements we're working on, but always interested to hear more about that feedback.
Awesome, thanks, Nick. Yeah, and with all of those documents as well, we do have the right at the bottom of the pages the ability for you to post that feedback on GitHub too. So you don't have to just reach out to us directly. We have a process and a pipeline for improving that content. Okay, so from a second question back to Yina, when is the current Microsoft Graph beta version going live, Yina? We get this often a lot from a beta perspective, and I just kind of explain the difference between beta, and V1. And the follow-up question would be is when will V2 be available?
Okay. Today there are around 12,000 APIs on Microsoft Graph, and coming up from different, I will say, stages of product maturity, which means that some of those APIs are going to be ready for their prime time, be used by production applications, and those are the ones that are in the V1 version of the API. And some of the APIs are more like in development, in a stage where we are still ironing out the details of the API or maybe the functionality that it supports, and those are in beta. We tend to follow a practice of 3 to 6 months for APIs to be in beta and move into V1. However, that we have outliers on that front, where there are some APIs that, like, because of where we are in that maturity curve, end up being in beta for quite some time, way beyond the 6-month mark. We are tracking those and figuring out how do we make sure that we close on the remaining items that prevents us from taking them to V1, and such that we can make sure that all of the functionality is available for developers so that they can use them in the production applications. Now for V2, our support, our versioning policy for V1 is that we are constantly adding non-breaking changes to the version, right? Like, so new functionality is adding to the V1 is being added to the V1 version all the time, as you can see on our changelog. So until we align on a quite significant change on our API signature, we don't foresee in the near future going into the V2 version.
That's perfect. Thanks, Gina. And so let's have a look at the next question. Is there any performance improvement plan for migrating private chat messages faster? It seems impossible to migrate the private chat messages for large organizations in a short migration project. And so this one I will defer to Nick Kramer from the Teams team.
Yeah, I'm a little puzzled by that question because we don't have APIs for migrating one-on-one and group chats. We do have APIs for migrating channel messages, and they function at large volume with the, I forget exactly what they call the flag, but there's the migration mode you put your channel into. Right. And then you can import large volumes, and you can also set the sender to arbitrary values, including people who aren't even in the organization anymore. And you can also set the timestamp to be in the past. There is no equivalent for one-on-one and group chat messages right now. And so I'm puzzled how you could find it too slow if it doesn't exist.
Okay, we'll definitely have that as a aka.ms/askgraph question. We'll make sure we get that a little more detailed follow-up on that question. Actually, while we have you, Nick, Is there a way to pull Teams chat history via Graph to save chat sessions in an event like this? So a Teams live event mode. Is there APIs available to pull those things through?
Yeah, we have APIs for getting messages in all the different contexts. You can get channel messages, you can get chat messages, you can get meeting messages, which are really a form of chat. And we have that with application permissions and with delegated permissions.
Awesome. That's good. Okay, and so Iker, are there code samples in GitHub for connecting to Graph, and specifically in brackets they've pointed out maintained by Microsoft?
Yes, we actually have, other than just having the GitHub repo, we have different examples for everyone who's looking for a different style of learning. In the Microsoft Graph documentation, if you go to ak.ms/graph, you will be directed to the developer portal, and there you can see the quick starts and tutorials. If you're looking for examples for different languages, you can just go to quick starts and try out the Graph API. Also, we have tutorials for different languages available in the documentation. I linked in the chat already, but I can link again. On top of the tutorials and quick starts, we also have learn paths available for Microsoft Graph. If you're starting from scratch and if you're more step-by-step example exercise completing learning person, you can just visit ak.ms/learn-graph, and there you will find Graph fundamentals learn tutorials, learn paths. We also have different scenarios for JavaScript and .NET Core you can find in Microsoft Learn. And we also have YouTube videos, but I'm sure it's not related with the GitHub repos. We have a lot of examples available for Graph. The roof for all these resources is ak.ms/graph. You can just visit the developer portal and find all of the tutorials examples available there.
Awesome. Thank you, Aicha. Yeah, we definitely have a lot of content that you can go get to. So I appreciate you sharing all those things, and we'll definitely get the links in the chat so you can pull those and click on those and have a look. So Kaylin, for Azure AD B2C, we must migrate to Microsoft Graph since Azure AD Graph is at end of life. Many features of Microsoft Graph do not work with Azure B2C. Is there an ETA for when B2C will reach feature parity with the regular Azure AD APIs? It's a good question.
Thank you, Jeremy. So the plan is to reach feature parity somewhere around mid of next year. We have been a little slow in catching up with what we refer to as external identities. Our plan is to have all the features of B2C available on external identities, along with a set of newer features which will make development for consumer-focused apps a little easier. For the time being, if your application is working well with AD Graph for B2C operations, please continue to do so. We will be supporting those APIs for a very long time, and we'll definitely have a lot of things available in terms of documentation and migration plans when the APIs will be available in the MS Graph for these operations. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Kaylin, for that update. Okay, Jeremy Kelly. Will it be possible for external users to log into the host tenant Graph API and manage basic resources, i.e. SharePoint site access? Do external users have access in order to enumerate users from Azure Active Directory? So I think this is similar to Kaylin's question a little bit on this notion of external users and guests, but what's our approach there with SharePoint and host tenants?
Good question. This isn't an area I've explored too much yet, given the complexity of setting up the environment to do it. But my understanding is that, SharePoint permissions are SharePoint permissions. And so if you grant external users the right permissions on the SharePoint artifacts you're looking to manage, you should have access regardless of whether those users are external or internal. This might be something worth following up more on one of our other forums for further follow-up. I think the external users and shared channels and other stuff are fairly new and we're still kind of exploring the right guidance for how people should work with those things. But my general understanding is if you set the permissions right on the SharePoint side, there shouldn't be too much difference. And there are a few cases we've seen where that hasn't been super obvious, and not all of that information and guidance has made it to the right places yet. So that's something we're still working on tracking down and getting the right information out.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy.
Okay.
Next question to Nick again, because you'll focus on admin commandlets and a PowerShell. Is Microsoft focus to invest in Microsoft Graph and slowly sunset the rest of the modules like the Azure AD PowerShell modules and the SharePoint commandlets that are out there, and Exchange commandlets, another one? Nick, what's our plan and strategy there with what we think about Microsoft Graph and our PowerShell SDK?
Absolutely, right? I mean, the vision is that the admin APIs will eventually make their way onto Microsoft Graph. We are talking right now with the various product groups and helping them create their API or migrate their API over Microsoft Graph, right? For example, we are talking with the Exchange folks on the ability to bring some of the EWS features that they have around mailbox management, for example. So we are investigating this right now. We don't have an ETA for it, of course, but it is something that we are working towards. So making sure that whatever you can do right now with the other APIs from an admin perspective are also available on the Graph surface.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, that's definitely a journey we're on, but it's getting closer and closer. Can you obtain Yammer data, in specifically usage data in this case, using the Graph APIs? And I'm going to put that to Brian, who's on my team that's been working with the Yammer team a little bit on here. And I know you've answered this in chat, but I think it'd be great to have this recorded in the video, Brian.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we do offer a number of different Microsoft 365 usage reports under our Reports API. So things for SharePoint activity, for Teams activity. We do actually have 3 reports available for Yammer activity as well. So feel free to take a look into our docs pages for this, go under the reports tab, and you can see the ones that are available out there. If there are additional reports that you're looking for that we don't yet have out there, again, please do put this onto our feedback portal. You can go to aka.ms/graphfeedback and share those use cases, share those reports, other things that you're looking for. Similarly as well, if you're looking for Yammer APIs on Graph, we'd love to hear about those, your use cases, and then share that back with our product groups.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Okay, next question. Which Graph API webhook allows us to know in real time, Teams meeting, who raised hand, who muted, who is sharing, and so on? Is this something out there or on the roadmap? And that will go to Nick Kramer.
I missed an important word there. What was the question?
So are there webhooks available for things like if I raise my hand in the meeting, or I muted, or someone shared, those kind of things in the API?
So not for raising hands. There's change notifications for changes that show up in the online meeting resources. And so some of those things that you mentioned show up there. Raise hands is not one of them.
Okay. So if they wanted to get that on the roadmap, we have aka.ms/graphfeedback, which is a way that you can provide your feedback on things that you need that aren't currently in there. So things like Yammer and those types of things gives us a great indication for us to prioritize our backlogs there. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. Okay, so when will ToDo Tasks become available application level? So we get this question a lot about tasks, both from a to-do and a planner application API perspective. There is work actively in play with the to-do APIs to bring those through, as well as with planner. There's active engineering work now on application only. And if you looked on aka.ms/graph you would see that application permissions for planner is marked as working on it now. And so that's a great way for you to see what things we're actively working on from the different API teams. It's a good way of keeping up to date on if you've requested that feature, whether we're actually engaged and looking at it. So please check out that site. Yina, for you, do you have any plans to move to GraphQL?
It's definitely an investigation that we have entertained multiple times over the last few years, but we have no immediate plans. And when I say immediate, is within the next 6 months to support a GraphQL head on top of Microsoft Graph. That said, we do have a team that is actively investigating not only GraphQL, but also gRPC. And, we'll see.
Awesome, thank you. And there was an SPFX one that someone just moved in my back end list. Waldek, from an SPFX perspective, would it be possible for an external user to view some of the available resources by simply viewing a deployed SPFX app in a SharePoint page? So basically, can we call Graph from an SPFX page, and what kind of capabilities do they have there? I think is a way of summarizing that question up.
Yeah, and the answer is short, yes, of course, right? So Graph works just fine with both internal users and external, and especially when it comes to SPFX, the trick or the extra ingredient is that external user needs to have the access to catalog where the SPPKG, where the SPFX component is deployed in, that they have access to that. With that in place, everything works, right? So it's just like that extra switch you have to enable in a way, right, to give that access to these users.
Awesome, thanks, Waldek. Kaylin, this one's for you from an identity side. Would you please talk about the ways, the authentication methods of Microsoft Graph that are supported? So any variations on OAuth 2, or is OAuth tool the right way to do things? Like, how do you guide your developers when it comes to calling the graph with an identity?
The plans for getting an application or a user's authentication done with MS Graph today is to use the OpenID OAuth. We don't have any plans as of yet to support any other protocols. There have been a lot of asks around supporting SAML and such, but we don't have any particular plans today. So if you are familiar with OAuth specifically, that will continue to work for foreseeable future as far as authenticating with Microsoft Graph is concerned.
Awesome, thanks, Kaylin. Jeremy Kelly again, is there any way to receive file usage statistics? Currently are gathering all kinds of SharePoint usage, but we're now able to gather data on file usage.
I think it depends on the usage data you're looking for specifically. Most of that information tends to fall either under the reporting APIs or under the activity APIs. And I believe you can get activity reports for individual drive items. I haven't been in there in a while, but I'm pretty sure the activity API will give you some basic count of views and count of actions that happen. I would look for the documentation on the activity API. I believe it's under our file docs and not under our site docs. It's get activities by date, maybe. I know there's an API for activities on the drive item. That's where I would look for that kind of information.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Jeremy. Lou Berth, from an Exchange API perspective, there are feature sets in EWS that are currently not available in the graph. What is our plan there from an EWS to graph perspective?
Yeah, as I said before, not everything is there in the graph yet, and the team is working attacking specific scenarios. So as the question says, for instance, in the case of backup and restore type of scenarios, the team is working on putting together new APIs and new endpoints to precisely, offer this to be solved through the Graph API. And we have so many other type of scenarios like this, like migration, for instance, or e-discovery. So we are working together to complete all of these gaps, and we will announce to the public as we make progress on those specifics. Most likely, backup restore will be the first thing you will be hearing from us.
Awesome. Thanks, Liberth. And we're coming close to time. I've got a few more questions I'm going to squeeze in. I know we don't quite have a hard stop at 30 minutes, so I'll squeeze 4 more questions in. Brian, are there any plans for Microsoft to release more first-party graph connectors, looking for AEM, Workday, and Slack specifically? I don't want to use partner connectors due to the additional cost and support.
Excellent question. Yeah, so as you may be aware, for Microsoft Graph connectors, being able to ingest external content into Microsoft Graph to then surface into a number of different experiences. There's search, there's some additional ones that we're highlighting this at Build, Context IQ, Intelligent Discovery, e-discovery, and more. We do have a number of first-party connectors as well as third-party partners who have also published connectors, so very complementary in that fashion. We are continually looking to see, what are those in-demand data sources from our customers. We have feedback. We're going to continue to look at these as potential connector platforms and announcements as those things come onto our roadmap.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. I had a quick question here on you mentioned that V1 APIs are continuously being updated. Is there a way to subscribe to be notified of changes to specific APIs or topics of the API, like Planner or Tasks? I'll take this one. We actually shipped a change log. And if you go to graph.microsoft.com, in the top corner, there's an ability for you to launch the change log. And that's something that's tied straight into our shipping process. And we have an RSS feed. And so if you wanted to subscribe to the RSS feed, we've got customers and partners that will do this with Power Automate, where they'll take those changes and send email digests of any of the changes that happen in the change log, because it is essentially XML in the background. That's the best way to keep up to date with what's landing on the service of the API as it happens. But with regards to things that are in progress of being worked on, it definitely would be the aka.ms/graph feedback pages, where there isn't RSS yet. It's a new platform that Dynamics has built for the whole of Microsoft for user feedback. But it's definitely something we're looking to keep improving. So keep an eye on how you can button that up to make it more automated. Okay, and then one last question, and I'm going to randomly pick one here, so everyone's going to have to be on their toes. What top-level connections are available for adaptive cards? And this one will go out to Fabian, who's been working with adaptive cards, and specifically on talking about user objects being shown in adaptive cards. Fabs, would you be able to jump on camera to talk about that a little bit?
Certainly. So with the user objects on adaptive cards, that's something that we're seeing a lot of love from. We're working with several different teams in terms of making that show up in all the different canvases. Right now, obviously, with adaptive cards, you can tap into the user endpoint, and you can certainly surface that on Teams and inside Outlook. We're looking to see if we can also light that up in other components, such as MGT, but that is something that's a work in progress.
Awesome. Thank you, Fabian. Paulette, your Teams thing is showing up just a little bit over our slide here, but for more information on Microsoft Graph sessions that are available at Build this week, if you go to ak.ms/graph sessions, if you didn't get your question answered today, I'm sorry. I was trying to make sure that everyone on the panel got a question based on the questions that were coming through and spread the love across everyone that volunteered here. If you didn't get your questions answered, please go to ak.ms/askgraph. That will take you to the Microsoft Q&A forums, where if you ask those questions there, we will get those answered. There were definitely a few in here that need a little bit more clarification to be able to answer them in detail. So please jump on those. I really appreciate everyone jumping in and asking these questions, and thank you to the panel of experts here that came on the call. We look forward to keeping in touch with you throughout Build. Enjoy the rest of Build, and please keep in touch with Q&A and our Twitters with the hashtag of Microsoft Graph this week and MS Build, and enjoy the rest of your week.